When people think of independent films, usually their minds go to small, intimate movies with very tiny budgets, movies like Moonlight or Lady Bird. What you don't think of are giant science fiction epics with tons of different unique alien species and space battles, such as a movie like Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. But, as it just so happens, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is an indie movie, and in fact, the most expensive indie movie of all time, with a budget of $180 million. But unfortunately, this little indie film was also a huge box office bomb, and missed the mark for many audiences and critics. So today, I want to take another look at this failed franchise starter, explore the history, analyze why it failed, and offer some of my personal thoughts on why it didn't work. Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is a passion project of a film that exists due to one man, French filmmaker Luc Besson. You may know Luc Besson as the filmmaker behind Lucy, Leon the Professional, and The Fifth Element. He also has a gross history of dating teenagers, but we won't be talking about that today. I just wanted to say, I don't like this guy. As a child, Besson was always a huge fan of the influential French comic series, Valerian and Laureline, which ran from 1967 to 2010. The idea to adapt the comic series into a feature film actually first popped up around 1997, when he was filming The Fifth Element. Here's a quote from Besson in Deadline. "It only came to mind during the shooting of Fifth Element, not before. I was already 30 years old. I hadn't thought about it because it was part of my childhood, and who thinks of making a film about their childhood souvenir? I had Valerian comic book writer Jean-Claude Mézières working on The Fifth Element, and he's the one who said, 'Why are you doing this film? Why don't you do Valerian?' For years, Besson was hesitant to touch the property because he thought it would be impossible to adapt, just due to the pure scale and spectacle. However, he bought the rights anyway and worked on and off on a script for a number of years. It wasn't until Avatar released in 2009 when he saw that it might be possible to adapt the story. He threw away the script he was working on and started from scratch with a more ambitious story. In 2012, the project was officially announced by Besson's own production company. A few years later, in 2015, a release date and the two lead actors were announced. The film would debut on July 21st of 2017 and would star Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne. Besson decided to go the independent route for the film, choosing not to work with a big studio, which means he would have to find the funding himself. In 2015, Besson went to the Cannes Film Festival with a presentation, a script, and the lead stars to secure financiers for the project. After pitching the movie to around 70 foreign distributors, he managed to secure around 60 to 70% of the film's budget. Over the next year, the rest of the budget would be found through various investors and companies, one of the biggest ones being Fundamental Films, who pitched in $50 million. By the time production had rolled around, the budget was estimated to be around $180 million, which broke two different records. It is both the most expensive European film and the most expensive independent film of all time. When asked how he is sleeping at night knowing that this was the most expensive independent film ever made, he said this: "First, I always sleep very well. I have absolutely no trouble sleeping because I never forget that it's only a film. I'm not a surgeon saving lives. I take my job very seriously, but I'm not taking myself seriously. It's only a film. The best I can have is people watch, and after 2 hours they say, 'Oh my god, it was so fun. Oh, I want to see it again.' That's basically the best I can achieve, which is not going to change the face of the world. That's why I'm sleeping well. No one is asking me to do more than the best I can, and that is what I'm doing." There was a huge amount of work done in pre-production before a single frame was even shot. Besson reportedly wrote a 600-page book describing in detail all the species, biographies for all the characters, backstory for the world, and all sorts of lore. Additionally, storyboarding for the film took over 7 months. Originally, Besson wanted to film the project in France, both to create over 1,000 jobs for the local economy and to take advantage of the local tax credits, which would benefit the film over $30 million. But due to the fact that the movie was to be shot in English, the project wouldn't be eligible for the credit, and Besson almost moved production to Hungary instead. However, the criteria to obtain these tax credits was tweaked, and Besson was able to shoot the project in France after all. Principal photography officially kicked off on January 5th of 2016, of course shooting in France at a studio in Saint-Denis. Production was set to last 115 days. However, shooting must have went well, as Besson stated that they finished 3 days ahead of schedule, which is pretty rare when it comes to these big blockbusters. The film was then sent off to post-production, where over 2,700 visual effects were done by Industrial Light and Magic, Weta Digital, and Rodeo FX. In an effort to promote the film, Besson reached out to Sir Paul McCartney to get permission to use the Beatles song Because in the trailer. At the time, this was actually the first time that a master recording from the band had been featured in a film advertisement. Leading up to the film's release, Besson expressed much interest in doing sequels, but it would all come down to the reaction from audiences, as he said this: "It's not just about the money. It's a little more complicated than that. It's a feeling also. What I need to have is an enthusiasm. I need to have an audience around the world start sending messages. Oh my God, please do another one. If I feel this message, then off I'll go. But not if it's just the core fans and the rest of the world hates the film." So how did the rest of the world react to the sci-fi epic? Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets released on July 21st of 2017, with an opening weekend gross of $17 million. It debuted 5th in the box office, right behind Dunkirk, Girls Trip, Spider-Man Homecoming, and War for the Planet of the Apes. In the US, it would only make $41 million. However, the international box office was much better at $184 million. Altogether, the movie made a total worldwide gross of $225 million. And against a budget of $180 million, not including marketing, distribution, or the theater's cuts, that made this film a box office bomb. It's estimated that Valerian lost upwards of $80 million. The reviews also looked pretty grim. The film currently holds a 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb, a 47% critic and a 53% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 2.6 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So the film was both a failure at the box office and missed with a majority of moviegoers. This means the franchise dreams that Luc Besson had were quietly put to rest. And that, of course, invites the question of what caused this movie to fail, both from a commercial perspective and an artistic perspective. Just as a preface to this section, I am mostly analyzing why this movie failed in the United States, since it actually did pretty well overseas, so just keep that in mind. When examining what went wrong with Valerian, I noticed a lot of similarities to another infamous sci-fi box office bomb, Disney's John Carter, which I covered in another video if you want to check that out. These similarities include the name change from the source material, the lack of wide market appeal, the choice of the lead actors, and a weak marketing strategy. So let's explore each of these aspects one by one, in addition to some more problems that plagued this film. First up is the source material. Similar to how Disney shortened the name of John Carter of Mars to just John Carter, the filmmakers of this movie took Loreline out of the title and added on City of a Thousand Planets. I'm not sure why they did this, because this new title is pretty complicated and completely leaves out one of the main characters. Additionally, although the comics are super popular in Europe, not many people in the United States have even heard of this property. You can't expect US moviegoers to show up in droves if they don't recognize the source material, and certainly not in modern Hollywood, where most people will only show up to the theater for sequels, prequels, and remakes. It's very reminiscent of what happened with Better Man, the Robbie Williams biopic. That movie barely made any money in the US because we don't know who the hell this guy is, even though he may be a superstar in the UK. And then there's the issue of the two leads. I'll explore why they don't work in the next section, but just from a commercial perspective, they were bad choices. Although these actors are well known and respected, I wouldn't necessarily call them A-listers, and I don't think they're capable of supporting a major franchise like this one. Just like what Andrew Stanton tried to do with John Carter, Luc Besson went out of his way to try and cast more unknown actors in the lead roles, but it ended up backfiring big time. Granted, just having A-listers in the lead roles doesn't guarantee a hit, as we've seen time and time again, but I think it would have helped this film at least a little. One of the biggest problems that Valerian ran into was hard competition at the box office. Valerian decided to go with a summer blockbuster release, which is respectable, but it was also a gamble, because then it was up against big franchises like War for the Planet of the Apes, which was on its second week, Spider-Man Homecoming, which was on its third week, and Despicable Me 3, which was on its fourth week. There was just too much direct competition for Valerian to do solid numbers like it needed to. And the biggest competition for this film was released on the same weekend, that being Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, which grossed $50 million in its opening weekend and over $500 million in its theatrical run. In an article by Forbes, author Scott Mendelson points out an interesting fact about how Dunkirk basically had all the same talking points that Valerian did. Here's a quote. What were the selling points for Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets? It was from a noted visionary filmmaker. It offered something that audiences hadn't seen before. It offered a unique cinematic experience explicitly served by seeing it on the biggest movie screen possible. It was a break from the franchise reboots, revamps, and sequels, offering a story that wasn't necessarily original, but was a new-to-cinema adventure. Now, pop quiz, hotshot. Am I talking about Valerian, or am I talking about Dunkirk? Dunkirk not only monopolized all the IMAX screens and most of the premium large format auditoriums, but also the "you must see this movie on the giant movie screen" narrative. The run-up to release was filled with posts about Chris Nolan, not Luc Besson. We got tons of articles about the right way to see Dunkirk, but few on the right way to see Valerian, in 3D, in the biggest auditorium you could find. Dunkirk got to be the one you've been waiting for, a big break from the sequels and reboots, and something that demanded to be seen on the big screen. I think Scott Mendelsohn hit the nail on the head with this point, as the marketing for Valerian was poor and was overshadowed by Dunkirk. A lot of people will point out that Valerian shares many similarities with Guardians of the Galaxy, and then wonder why one space opera based on mostly lesser-known characters smashed at the box office, while another one flopped. And the difference is that Guardians of the Galaxy was a good film. It got great reviews and it had great word of mouth, while Valerian had pretty mixed reviews and pretty poor word of mouth. So that leads into what about this film is so poor. And I have some theories I want to share on why this movie doesn't work for many people. I have very complicated feelings about Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. On one hand, I enjoyed the film and respect the hell out of it. But on the other hand, it has so many noticeable flaws that I can't ignore. It's a movie that I wish was so much better, because you can tell all the hard work and love that went into it. Before we talk about what didn't work, let's recognize the good in the movie. The work that was put into the lore and world building is impressive. I mean, there's a scene in this movie where a character falls through several floors and each floor has a completely unique aesthetic and vibe. You just gotta respect the production design in that. You have to admit, the visuals in this movie go hard. Also, the first 5 minutes of this movie are awesome. Once I finished the movie, I had to go back and rewatch the intro just because I loved it so much. Showing how the human race has advanced to the space age with the shaking of hands with different nations, and then shaking hands with different aliens, paired with the David Bowie song was just perfection. I also found the whole action sequence that happened between the two different universes really fun and original. There were so many great ideas in this movie, but they just get lost in the execution, which leads into what doesn't work. First off, we need to talk about the casting. This might be some of the worst casting I've ever seen in a major film. It seemed like not a single actor fit their character, from the leads to the supporting cast. Some of the voice actors were well cast, such as John Goodman or the three little duck guys. I don't know what these guys are. But as a whole, none of the actors really clicked with the characters in my opinion. The most egregious casting is the two main leads. Now, I haven't seen enough of Cara Delevingne's other work to say if she's a good actor or not, but I know Dane DeHaan is a way better actor than what we see in this movie. I love his other work, but he just does not fit the character of Valerian in my opinion. To be fair, I haven't read any of the comics that this movie is based on, so I'm not in the best position to judge if he's a good fit or not. But Valerian in this movie just came off as so unlikable. When it comes to cocky, smartass characters like Valerian, there's a very fine line that an actor needs to walk between lovable bad boy and overconfident prick. And unfortunately, this portrayal lands in the latter. He's like a frat dude in this movie, it's so weird. And I thought Cara Delevingne was straight up bad in this movie. For so many of her line readings, it felt like she was disinterested and bored. Nothing against her personally, but I don't think she worked in this movie. Not to mention her and DeHaan have some of the worst chemistry I have ever seen. I was reading reviews for this movie and I saw that many people thought they were siblings for a majority of this movie, which I totally get. They mixed like oil and water and they failed to play off each other in any way. Then we have supporting characters such as Rihanna and Ethan Hawke, who feel so out of place in this movie and like they walked onto a completely different set than the rest of the cast. Just like what I've been saying this entire video, I liked the concept of these characters, but the execution was off. The casting of jazz legend Herbie Hancock is also a bit odd. I mean, I love his music, don't get me wrong, but why was he cast in a sci-fi blockbuster? Now we need to talk about the plot. The best way I could describe what's wrong with this plot is to compare it to a video game. The characters in this movie have to go on separate quests and hit different checkpoints before they can continue on the main mission. For example, Valerian gets lost in the City of a Thousand Planets. He said it! And then Laureline needs to track him down. But in order to track him down, she needs to get the information from these three duck guys, who then tell her she needs to fetch a special jellyfish in order to find out where Valerian is. So they need to bribe this submarine driver to go into this underwater area and steal the jellyfish off these giant whale things. Once she finally has the jellyfish and sticks it on her head, then she knows where Valerian is. The characters go on this huge side quest that takes up nearly 15 minutes of the screen time, and it barely has any impact on the overall narrative. It makes the movie feel overstuffed and overcomplicated. And then we go through the exact same process when Laureline gets kidnapped and Valerian needs to go save her. Laureline gets kidnapped by these weird gray aliens who take her to their base. But in order to get into the base, Valerian needs to look like those aliens. So he goes to a strip club that has a shapeshifter alien. After the alien does a little song and dance, he tries to hire them, but they say no because the pimp won't let them go. So Valerian has to knock out the pimp, and then he and the shapeshifter become one so they can get past the gray alien guards. Just like what happened with the whole jellyfish side quest, this shapeshifter side quest adds on an extra 15 minutes to the movie and has no impact on the overall narrative. Sure, the shapeshifter character is interesting, but we are introduced to them and they die within this 15-minute window, and they don't even do anything to further our other characters' arcs. So they just feel so unnecessary. Both of these side quests are useless to the overall plot, add on an extra 30 minutes to the movie, throw in a bunch of unnecessary characters and lore, and probably added tens of millions of dollars onto the budget. And on top of that, they made the plot of this movie feel episodic and meandering. You get the feeling that Luc Besson did all this work building the lore for this world, and wanted an excuse to show it all off at the expense of the quality and focus of the film. And I think this highlights the biggest problem with this movie. There are just too many ideas stuffed into this thing. It feels like 3 movies that were mashed into one, and results in an unfocused mess. As much as I've stated time and time again in other videos that studio interference is one of the biggest issues that can ruin a movie, this is an example of why sometimes unfettered creative control can be dangerous. There are 3 problems that you see pop up all the time in these epic director-led passion projects. They are always overstuffed with ideas, they are all over the place, and they are self-indulgent. We've seen this time and time again with movies like Megalopolis, Beau is Afraid, and Babylon, to name a few. Although these movies have their fans, and I love movies like this, just as the case with Valerian, they end up being divisive and are almost always box office bombs. I also didn't like this Scooby-Doo ending where the characters sat the audience down and explained the villain's plan beat by beat. It was really cheesy and lazy. One critique I kept seeing pop up on a lot of reviews is how Valerian was too similar to Star Wars and was a Star Wars ripoff. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't see this comparison at all, and I think it is a very lazy critique. Aside from being the same genre, what similarities do these properties have? The characters are vastly different and the plot beats are nowhere near the same. Yes, some planets, ships, and aliens might be similar, but these are aspects that you can find in literally all science fiction movies. Desert planets and big fat aliens are not unique to Star Wars. Not to mention, these comics came out before Star Wars was even released. The same thing happened with John Carter when it came out in theaters. People pointed out how the movie stole things from Star Wars, not realizing that Star Wars is the one that took inspiration from John Carter's source material. I just think the fact that Star Wars is one of the most popular movies of all time makes it easy to spot the similarities. Star Wars has more in common with Hidden Fortress, a movie in a completely different genre, than it has in common with Valerian. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on this take, but that's just how I feel. Okay, I think I'm done rambling. Let's wrap it up. Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets was a property that had so much potential to be the next big science fiction franchise, but the filmmakers fell victim to the same problems that John Carter did. Just like that film, Valerian crashed and burned at the US box office. Not only was it a commercial flop, but bad casting, a poor script, and unchecked creative control resulted in a mess of a movie that missed with many moviegoers. At the end of the day, I find the story of Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets to be a sad one. There are so many great ideas at play, but the execution was just off. But that's my opinion. What's yours? Did you see this movie? What did you think? Why do you think it failed? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. Here's a clue for next week's video.
Astoundingly awful.